This is Craig and Andrew, two Ranger qualified Army officers with MBAs, here to help you improve your business through leadership.
Each week, we'll deliver easy lessons from the battlefield to the boardroom on how to improve team performance. If you're a leader or want to be, this is the place for you.
Welcome to the cohort.
Disclaimer: the views in this podcast are those of the authors alone and do not represent the views of the Department of Defense or the U.S. Army.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Command Post Cohort.
Good morning, Craig.
Good morning.
Before we start, I gotta lay level with you. Atlanta United got beat pretty soundly last night. This might be it might have some edge to it on today.
Yeah, that was not what we were looking for.
No. Anyway.
Well, today I think we're going to talk a little bit about values. It's something that has come up in some of our previous episodes as a small portion, and we thought that, as important as values to an organization are, is something we should discuss and talk about what role they play in leadership and how they affect an organization.
Yeah, they're pretty important. I mean, you heard Bill say it a couple episodes ago. They kind of became the guidepost for his organization. So they're pretty important because they can orient the company, especially if they're bottom up like he did.
Yeah, I think that so first I guess we should define what a value is, because sometimes we look at values as something that is just, maybe it's on a wall written somewhere, somebody got it on a piece of paper in a desk drawer, but it's not lived. So I think Andrew, you got a definition for us?
Yeah. So what are values? Well, they are fundamental beliefs that guide an individual's attitudes and actions, helping to determine what is important to them. So overall, right, what are the things that are important, right?
Yeah.
What are the things that you can orient around? What are the things that guide you or the business?
Yeah, and I think that it's interesting if you look at, so I'll start with where we came from in the Army. The Army has values. It is a value-based organization. And, they were real slick with coming up with an acronym of leadership
So many
as they did the Army values of loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. I think I got
those are them.
Got them. And so it's one of those things that, to me, they were always the high level overarching standards that you were operating inside of, because that was what was important, like you said, important to the organization and your beliefs. And so I think it's natural that, some of that stuff for the Army, the Army as a whole and the individual soldiers are going to believe in things like loyalty, duty, and personal courage. Like there's a lot of those things where it makes sense. And so I think when you look at your team, your organization, and you're trying to develop these and like, what are our goals here?
Yeah.
I think it should be something that, one, makes sense. And, there's no way the Army could have a value, or, say, we're going to do no harm. Well, that's counterintuitive to an Army in a war.
Yeah.
Now, your medics can have that sentiment.
Yeah.
And that may work good if you're an emergency medical provider in the civilian world, but it's got to make sense. And you want that buy-in, which I think is important. Like you mentioned that Bill described how he formulated that check out that previous episode if you want to hear that in depth. But they use that bottom-up feedback of going to their team and say, what's important to you?
Yeah.
What are the things that you value most in life, in the team, in the organization, what we're doing as a mission, and how do you, and then you can probably kind of take those and put all those together, and you'll find there's some common themes in your team, what everybody finds important. Then you get some of that buy-in.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, I go back to Simon Sinek, right? Start with why, right? These are kind of your values. Why what are the core values of this company, right? Right at the start. Why are we doing this? So I found, so for example, Walmart, right? Their values published on their website: service to the customer, respect for the individual, strive for excellence, and act with integrity. So why that makes sense, right? You think about Walmart, whatever your opinions of them are, these are their stated values, right? And yes, we can see them on their website. They're probably published in their annual reports. Do they actually live by them? Well, I mean, service to the customer is their number one written priority. That seems to hold true to me, right? So these things aren't, ideally they should not be things that are just written on the website, published in the annual report, and never talked about ever again, right? Because if you do that, then we can all spot that, right? We know companies that have values, but they don't ever follow them, so you don't trust them to some degree, right? The values will help internally and externally orient the company. So, for example, Apple have accessibility, education, environment, inclusion, diversity, privacy, racial equality and justice, and supply chain innovation. Now, they just use single words. They kind of expand them quite a bit
Yeah.
into accessibility. Doesn't just mean everybody can buy an iPhone. It means what an iPhone can do for people that have different abilities.
Right.
And so they really go deep into how they can improve technology to improve the lives of people. So that's a pretty strong value when you kind of
Yeah.
unpack it.
Yeah.
And
And
you can
I
see
do.
it in their products.
Yeah. And I think it's important to highlight, like you mentioned, that these usually start out as kind of a one word headline,
Mhm.
but you have to really dive into what does it really mean and how does it apply to your team, your organization, and how are you going to achieve that? Because anybody can just pick some fancy words to say these are our values, but you really got to
Mhm.
think through, like, how are we going to apply this to our daily operations? If customer service is important to us, how do we make sure that our values don't contradict that? And how do you make sure that you are operating inside of that values bubble with everything you do in operations? Because you're still going to have a lot of other things going on inside that, but they're kind of your guiding lights, your compass, so to speak.
Mhm.
And how do you, I think from the very beginning, you want to be deliberate when you're developing these
Yeah.
values. And I'm sure they put a lot of emphasis on not just this idea of accessibility and saying, okay, well, accessibility is a value, but what does it mean? How do we do this? And then you've got those further explanations that really dive into the details of what that value means to that organization.
Yeah. I know while I was preparing for this episode, I think about also the other episode we did about how we kind of came our origin story,
Yeah.
right? We didn't sit down and as a class write down a set of values, right? But we kind of internally developed them over time. And if we were going to go back in time and ask everyone, hey, what are your values? We'd probably come up with a pretty good set.
Yeah.
But a hard work, teamwork, right, integrity, courage, and we demonstrated all that through being in the woods in Tuskegee National Forest all the time, right,
Yep.
helping each other out as much as possible.
Yeah.
And I think that really makes a difference, right?
And I think with values, you can kind of look at it from there's two options almost. Is one, if you've got a good cohesive team and things are going well and you identify, like, we probably should have some values here. Well, you can do that bottom up. You can say, all right, guys, hey, what is our values here? What's important to us? What is helping us, address our customers' needs with products and services and the reason we're being successful? But you can also look at it as maybe you're in a new leadership role and maybe you're starting something. I mean, you could be starting your own business or anything, and there's, say, five people, it's you and a few people, and you want to develop these. This is something that's going to help you develop the culture of that organization.
Mhm.
These values really, I think, set the tone for everything else, because like we talked about it, everything else happens inside of these. And I think that as a leader, if you kind of, obviously you want this to be collaborative with your team, but you lead them through this process of developing values, that really allows a culture to emerge. And it can happen without this. In our situation, we didn't develop our own while we were there at Auburn, but we also did have kind of the Army values hanging up there
Right.
that we were operating underneath of. Now we could have further refined those. I agree with you that that's something that we did have a lot of common values and common priorities that shaped our behavior there. But I think that as leaders, if we consider how do you want your team to function when you're not
Mhm.
there,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, that's a
how do
great way to
you
put it.
how do you want them to, if they can't call you, you're on vacation and they've got this big almost ethical dilemma, really it should go back to the company's values to determine what action to take.
Yeah. So every situation, right? We talk a lot about standards, and every situation is not necessarily going to fall into those kind of black and white standards, right? The published, what to do's, right? So these values, failing the standards, right? Well, the situation doesn't fit into those standards. You can take these values. Okay, well, is this within our company standards? Like picking a vendor, there's no published standard, right? Like
Right.
you need so many widgets. That's the standard, right? Because you kind of know based on your production timelines and stuff. But each vendor is going to be different in terms of, cost, delivery timeline, level of trust, quality of product, right? Well, there might be slight differences that align more with the company's values, right? One may have a more sustainable supply chain,
Yeah.
may focus on building communities in Africa or something, right?
Hmm.
Or one may just focus on getting you the cheapest quality product fastest. Which is more important to your company, right? Only your company values are going to drive that decision.
Yeah. And I think that there are some other, I don't know if the right term is industry standard, but certified B Corp comes to mind.
Mm,
Of it's out there as far as sustainable practices, and they've got a pretty long list of requirements to get that certification as a company. But they have a focus of their own set of values essentially, and what is important to them and how they operate. And other companies that value those same things can then, try to do business with those other organizations that are also certified as a B Corp. And I think that to your point of, you want to make sure that your operations are supporting your values and your mission. And sometimes it's going to come down to that decision, which of these course
mhm.
of actions do I take? And it's not as black and white as what the policy written says, and
Yeah,
it comes up to values.
yeah. So, and that gets to kind of why values are important for a business, right? They develop the culture, like Craig has said, right? Well, why is culture important? Well, because that becomes kind of your brand reputation, right? And how people act within the company. And if you have values to kind of center everybody on, and you stick to those values, right, it's going to reduce employee turnover. People are going to understand, customers will understand and associate your company with those values, and that will prevent them from going to others, especially if you hold to your values, they're going to develop trust in you. Oh, you're fine.
So one thing that comes to mind for me is, if I want a chicken sandwich, where do I go get a chicken sandwich? And more likely than not, it's probably going to be a Chick-fil-A if there's
Chick-fil-A.
one where I'm close by. And there are a lot of other places you can buy a chicken sandwich. But I think that it's a pretty good example of how a company's values have shaped their customer behavior, and it really goes into the success of the organization.
Mm,
Is, if I pulled up Chick-fil-A's values here, and they talk about how it reflects their purpose, their culture, and shape the staff and work experience. And they have things listed like, we're here to serve, we're better together, we're purpose driven, and we pursue what's next.
mm,
And so when I think about, I can look at those values, and I can tell you about when I went in Chick-fil-A last time, and they're here to serve. I mean, they are always going to the furthest extent of any fast food restaurant I've ever been in, of trying to make me comfortable, trying to get my order to me, asking me
Yeah.
anything else,
Yeah.
like, "Hey, would you like a refill on that drink?" Coming to my table to ask me things like that. And they go above and beyond. And one thing that I always, because they're always busy, I like to kind of observe
They
is
are.
yeah, I mean,
Man, they're always busy.
I can see the teamwork that they share behind the counter. I can see them
Mm.
helping each other,
Mm.
and I can't see all the way back in the kitchen. They got a wall there, but just in the team members that are up front, and you can see them helping each other. And then I go here to their website, and it talks about they're better together. An inclusive culture that leverages strengths, diverse talent to innovate, maximize our care for each other. And so you can see that stuff take place. And I think that it's interesting to be able to see the kind of the end results. Because I've
Hmm.
asked the question too, how did Chick-fil-A become the place where I want to go and get a chicken sandwich?
Yeah.
Because if I'm being honest, it's not because that chicken sandwich is something that I can't, it's, yes, it's slightly different than one I can get anywhere else, but it's not. I mean, chicken sandwiches aren't rocket science. I'll say it kind of quietly, but it's it's a chicken sandwich. But what it is I go there as a customer because of the culture, because I know what I'm getting. I
Hmm.
know what type of experience I'm going to have there. In the
Yeah.
same way, if you buy an Apple product, you kind of know what you're getting.
Yeah.
And you see all these results of culture. And I think that those cultures that have developed in a lot of these organizations, whether it be the Army, whether it be Chick-fil-A or Apple or Walmart, wherever, you can look back to those values
Hmm.
and see how that really created that environment and that culture for those teams to operate in.
Yeah. Well, you hit on several things right there that really demonstrate the value of values to a company, right? So
Yeah,
you just customer loyalty, right? You're going to
yeah,
continue to come back to Chick-fil-A, not just because of, you like the chicken sandwich, but because of the way it operates, right?
yeah,
You know it's going to be the same consistent experience, whatever Chick-fil-A you go into. You go to Chick-fil-A in Georgia, it's going to taste the same as a Chick-fil-A in Washington State.
yep,
And the teamwork they're able to execute allows decision making at a much lower level, right? Which promotes faster operations. So those are all pretty important things that have come from their stated and practiced enforced values. So, whether intentional or not, your values are visible in how you operate and
yeah,
people are going to notice.
yeah. I think that it's something that we probably on a daily basis don't think about. Like I don't
Mhm.
when I walk in there, I'm not thinking like, they have good values here, but I see the results. And I think, as leaders, when we're trying to develop our teams and our organizations, we've got to be looking as far upstream as possible. And we've got to try to get to the root cause of things.
Mm,
Just like if we have a problem, we want to find the root cause and not just fix a symptom. The same thing goes with behavior. Why did this person act this way to a customer? Why did this person respond this way to a crisis? I think we've got to go all the way back to what do we value as an organization, because people learn this stuff. And if you as a leader are not demonstrating the correct values, because you're always demonstrating values,
yep. Yep.
because that goes back to the whole people will say lead by example. You, congratulations, you are leading by example. It may
Yep.
be a poor example, but you are. Like there is that you can't just flip the switch of like, hey guys, look, I'm leading by example now. So the same thing goes with these values. If your team sees you doing things that are questionable or not in alignment with the values, be prepared for them to do the same. But I
Yeah.
think that when you think through leaders of these high performing organizations, they are always on a daily basis living out the values of that team.
Yeah. Think about, so if it's helpful, we might think about the opposite, right? So a company wherein it was not living up to its values. Wells Fargo comes to mind a couple of years ago, right? They were concerned about profit over everything else. And so, from the top down, So why did that happen? And so what happened because of that? Well, many, many, many fake accounts were open in customers' names,
Yeah.
right? Without the customer even knowing about it. And so now, whenever anybody says Wells Fargo, right, you're not going to trust them. I'm not going to
Yeah.
open up an account at Wells Fargo. They might have gotten better, since then, a while ago now, but
Yeah.
still, like now they've got an asterisk by their name. And if I had a choice, I'm not going to choose Wells Fargo. So, and I'm sure you can think of, listeners, you can think of many other examples, but it matters. And that's going to ultimately drive profit.
Yeah, it does. And that, in that example too, it goes back to that trust issue. And we're always talking about building trust inside the team, but that also goes to customers are part of the team. And I think we forget that
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah.
And they're a key piece of the business equation. And so there's got to be trust there too, not just inside of our organization and team, but we've also got to have trust with our clientele, our customers. And I think in that example, when profit was, I think at that time, considered the most important
Hmm.
value at that
Hmm.
organization. And so that's how you got the behavior that was inconsistent with probably whatever their published values were at the time, because they saw what their leaders were doing. The
Yeah.
leadership had made very clear what was important to them, and it was profit. And so why should we be surprised that now all of your mid and entry level employees are doing whatever it takes to make profit? That should be expected, essentially.
Yeah.
But when the bad things happen, we do always appear to be surprised.
Okay. So once you've kind of figured out the values important, Craig, like how do we enact them within our company and within ourselves?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different ways to go about it. And I think that the one of the first things is, if you've already got that team formed up, I
Mhm.
really do like the idea of the bottom up
Yeah.
formulation. I even tried something similar when I was in the Army when I first took over company command. You send out what they call a command climate survey, kind of gives you a gauge of what's going on in the company. And you have a lot of them are standard questions that the Army controls and you don't get a say in. And then there's some optional questions you can put in there, and there's some kind of free form. And so I put some questions in there about, like, what do you want this company to be known for? What is important to you that people think about when they think of this company? And it was essentially trying to get at, what are your values? What is your vision?
Mhm.
And I can't remember the specifics of all I used, but that's what I was trying to pull out, because it wasn't. I think as leaders, sometimes we feel like it has to rely on us to create this big grand vision statement, and we got to come up
Yeah.
with these values by ourselves. But I go back to, like, let's just ask the team. Let's see what everybody, because
Yeah.
none of us are as smart as all of us,
That's a great
and
point.
so I tried to collect it in that way, and I think Bill had mentioned he did it at his organization. They collected, hey,
Hmm.
what's important to you? What are your values? And then you kind of aggregate that data, and you look at it and say, hey, look, actually, all of these people, they may call it something different, but they're talking about trust, or they're talking about, maybe it's sustainability, or maybe they're focused on being purpose driven, whatever it is. And I think that's the good way, is you kind of get that 80% solution, and then you get some people in a room and you talk about it. And I know it
Yeah.
seems oversimplified, but I think that having those conversations, because you don't want it to just be Craig's idea. You're like, hey, these are now your values, and you're going to like it. That doesn't work. It's kind of like developing trust. You have to have this relationship, and I think that it's going to come down to a collaborative conversation at some point, and how you gather that data beforehand is,
Yeah.
kind of up to you. But what's your thoughts on that?
Well, so I was thinking slightly different, right? Like in the army, right? We do have, the leadership and army values and things like that. So when it came to me and my command philosophy in my company, I took it as what my soldiers or my employees could expect of me, right? And if you'll allow it, Your Honor, this will get back to the point. So like it was about 12 sentences, 10 or 12 sentences, and just sentences. Number one, this, number two, this, and about 10 of them, right? And it outlined every time I got a new uh, leader, a new junior leader into the organization, when I first took over, I talked to every single one of them. I handed them this sheet of paper. It was a single sheet of paper, plenty of white space on it, just 10 sentences.
Yeah.
And I read it all. I read it all to them. It kind of explained what each one meant, and I handed it to them and said, if you ever have any questions about how I lead or why I made a decision, look at this, and it's going to tell you what you can expect of me, right? And so what that does is, number one, it allows everybody that works for you a set of expectations, right? They understand how you're going to operate. But then number two, it kind of becomes their values,
Yeah.
right? Because they're operating within your kind of infrastructure there,
Hmm.
it becomes theirs as well. So I don't know if there's, in a more of a civilian company role, if there's not already published values, um, that's yeah, like what in a startup, right? Like what with Bill did. Yeah, I think that was great. That way you can figure it all out together. But you have to use that every day, right? So that's an example of how I embedded that in the culture. I grew the culture because that's what hey, I handed this. I talked about it all the time. I handed it to all the junior leaders. This is what you can expect of me. And every time I talked to some of them, I brought up one of the points, right? So you have to reinforce them almost at every turn, right? You
Yeah.
can't just put them on a website and ignore it. Now that you've developed them, you've built them, you have to kind of talk about it, message it,
Hmm.
so that people start associating you, other employees, and the brand with those values. They can all understand, all the employees can understand where to go to kind of operate.
Yeah. And I think too that, depending on the situation with your team, you may not be able to collaborate and figure this out. You
Hmm.
may have I mean, there are leaders out there that walk into situations because things are falling apart and that things
Yeah,
are not going
yeah,
well. Like,
yeah,
there are bad teams out there. Like, sorry, I'll say it. Like, it is
yeah,
not every team is rainbows and unicorns. Sometimes you got to go fix problems. And at that point, you may have to be doing the exact opposite of what I'm even talking about. You may be having to come up with that all on your own and then almost force feeding it.
yeah,
But
yeah,
but I think that no matter which way it's being done, whether you're walking into a good team or whether you're trying to do a turnaround, something that you mentioned that I think you have to do is live it daily. And
yeah,
you have to
yeah,
make sure that it is a part of all your decisions, because it goes back to that building the trust. How do I trust that these really are the values of the team? Well, I should be seeing it every day. I should have, just like I can walk into Chick-fil-A and know that they're a service-based organization. I didn't have to go to their website to know that. I could walk in the restaurant and see it.
yeah,
But we have to make sure as leaders we're doing the same thing. No matter if it was who came up with them, we have to make sure that we are emphasizing their importance on a daily basis.
yeah. So these are important things. Values are important because they're going to drive the culture. They're going to drive the organization to, ultimately better profit. Really, if you want to get down to it,
Yeah.
like why it's really important to business. Well, if you do not do well, if you do not have a set of stated values that you follow, you're going to become Wells Fargo and you're going to lose revenue. Right? If you do well, you're going to become Chick-fil-A or Apple. Right? Because they help, again, employee retention. They attract the right type of employees. They allow teams to operate more effectively, and customer loyalty. So I encourage listeners out there to take a little bit of time and think about what your values are. Now, in some corporations, it's going to be a lot easier, right? If you're the new shift supervisor at Walmart, and just go look on their website, right? And then start to think, okay, how can in my shift tomorrow, how can I execute these values? How can I demonstrate these values?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's It's a very important part of leadership that we probably um, we don't always give it the time
Mm,
required. We dive into other topics before talking about these values, but they're a critical piece of it.
yeah. Yeah.
All right, well, we appreciate y'all listening. We hope y'all have a good day out there.
Thanks, everybody. As always, take these lessons, use them, and spread them. Everyone is welcome in the cohort.
Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe for more, and drop us a line at commandpostcohort.com to request a specific topic.
We'll see you next time on the cohort.